think let's go ahead and get started, and we might have a couple more people join, but let's kick things off. So as you'll see, the title is Grant Writing. There's two parts to this presentation. The first one about searching for statistics and finding evidence, and then a little later we'll talk a little more about performance measures. But I do want to say that I hope that this is helpful beyond grant writing. I hope that this information will help how you conceptualize your program and communicate about what you do and why you do what you do. So think, even though the title, like I said, is about grant writing, try to think beyond grant writing. And okay, I just have all of the slides. Great. So welcome everyone. We've got all of our programs signing into the chat. I know probably most, if not all of you, were also on the call yesterday. So you got that introduction. I am Lou Thompson. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I am the Performance Management Analyst. So my position is funded through the Commission Investment Fund, which currently is focused on a lot of training and technical assistance. So specifically, my role is to work with all of the programs across the state, each of you, related to performance measures and evaluation, which also includes things like logic models, theory of change, data collection, data quality. So I know most of you, but there are a few new people, and I'm excited to get to know you soon. So I know yesterday Robin did a land acknowledgement, but I want to repeat that. I think it's valuable to recognize the land that we're on. So I will say that as I speak to you today, I'm in the Serve Washington offices in Olympia. So I'm on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, land that was stolen from tribes and bands within the Nisqually, Squaxin, Chehalis, and Cowlitz tribes. I pay my respects to their elders of the past and those individuals here today, colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and community. Acknowledging the truths of genocide, relocation, and assimilation is only the beginning. Serve Washington commits to the ongoing listening and learning in state to state and government to government relations. I sincerely express and hope that this land is one day returned to its rightful stewards, and I'm honored to be a guest upon these lands. So I invite you now to pause and reflect on where your footprint is located today. And similar to yesterday, you can do so silently, or if you would like, you can share in the chat. And if you're not sure about the land that you're on, the Native Land app is a starting place if you want to learn more. Okay. Are we ready to get started? So I wanted to kick things off with a little humor. As I was preparing the presentation and looking for some funny memes to include, I grabbed a couple, and so I like this one that says, latest research has shown. People will believe anything if you put latest research has shown in front of it. And then our little dinosaur friend that says, why is it called research when it's your first time searching for it? Okay, so this is what the part one is going to be about. We're those red stars specifically. So we're going to be talking about the statistics documenting the need and then the evidence. So you might have noticed in the application instructions, the word need has been removed. So this slide is from a CNCS presentation created years ago. However, the approach really is still the same. The community problem is the specific need you've chosen to address through your program. So this morning we'll be talking about the data documenting the need, which are statistics that document the scope, significance, and cause of the community problem or need that your program is going to address. And so more in depth, this is what we're going to be discussing related to searching for statistics. What does it mean that it's reputable, current, relevant? And we're also going to talk some about applying an equity lens to our language. And then the second part is evidence. So evidence is information from things like performance measurement results or evaluation or research findings that inform your understanding of why the intervention you've selected will result in the change identified as the outcome. So basically, that part of the application instructions, that's what we're going to cover, which you're likely familiar with. And so we'll talk about some details about what this looks like. Okay, I had to add one more meme because this little duck was super cute. So research, you mean like Google? Well, sure, if you have the right keywords. So that'll be part of our discussion. So this is taken from CNCS materials and presentations on theory of change. The data documenting the need really should focus on answering these three questions in these three areas. So the scope, who or what is affected, the significance, what's compelling about this, why should we care, and then the cause. Why does this problem even exist? And answering that question can help determine which approach or intervention might actually be effective in addressing the problem. So we're answering all of those, as we're answering all of those questions, we're looking for data that meets these criteria. So by reputable, we mean a source that has no stake in the outcome or research. For example, it should be published in a peer-reviewed journal or by a credible organization. And by up to date, there's really no hard and fast rule. There's no specific cutoff, like if it's older than 2013, then you shouldn't use it. But generally, I have seen CNCS say that within the research within the last 6 years, it would be considered generally current. So just to give you sort of a ballpark of what we're talking about, maybe think like last 6 years, though that's not a hard and fast rule. And then also be looking for data that's locally relevant. So are you serving one specific county? If so, then look for data on that county, or maybe just a specific school district or a handful of specific school districts. So look for data that's as specific to your service area as possible, or maybe you're serving a certain bioregion. So look for data for that region and not national data or statewide data. And keep in mind that news reports are not primary sources. So here are some examples. I'm just curious if people could reply in the chat which of these you use, or maybe some other data sources that you go to find data to support your approach. I really, since moving to Washington a few years ago, I discovered the county health rankings, and I really really dug into that data, and a lot of the data there uses sources like the CDC or the American Community Survey from the Census, USDA. I'm seeing people typing into the chat. Census data is a pretty popular one. And so you might know that the American Fact Finder has been decommissioned and is no longer available. I think that was pretty recent. So data are now available at data.census.gov. So that's kind of a newer thing. They also have a lot of webinars available to help people navigate their data. So if this is the type of thing I like exploring, and so if you are ever looking for something specific and you're running into issues, that's totally something you can reach out to me, and we can talk through at any time. I'm kind of looking at the chat. OSPI data, DNR, UW. Great. Yeah, all solid sources. Okay, I'm trying. There we go. So a common issue I want to warn about, this is something that we see often in grant applications, that the problem statement in your theory of change often turns into what looks like a data dump, where there's just so many statistics and so much information provided. And it could be relevant, but there's not really an explanation as to why it's relevant. So this can make it really difficult to identify the specific need that the intervention is supposed to address. So here's I have an example. So say there is Iberia County Parks. They say that they have a deteriorating trail system, and that this lack of maintained trail system leads to soil erosion and water runoff that pollutes nearby streams. And then hikers aren't staying on the trail, and so they're damaging fragile habitats. So their EnviroCorps maintains trails throughout the public parks. So if you were reading this application or this theory of change, and you saw data about water pollution, measures of soil erosion, poverty rates, invasive species cover rates, miles of unmaintained trails, average number of hikers, number of native bird species, which one or two of these would you say, like, that doesn't really seem relevant, or maybe it could be, but it's not really obvious without an explanation? Because in the chat, I'm curious what stands out at you. Yeah, a few people said poverty rate, right? Invasive species cover rates, native bird species, agree. Yeah, again, those could be relevant, but without a detailed explanation connecting the dots as to why it's relevant, the reader isn't going to understand how is poverty related to this soil erosion or water runoff. So great. I have another example, but I don't know that we need to do two. But I think we have time, so I'll just quickly mention. So this is more of an education example, and I know a lot of people are in the education focus area. So if students aren't graduating on time and teachers report struggles with classroom management, which data do you think would be less directly relevant for the program to describe in their theory of change? And you can also type into the chat. There's things like high school graduation rate. Oh, I think I put that twice. Graduation rate, drug use, poverty rates, teen pregnancy rates, discipline rates, unemployment. Yeah, I would, if students aren't graduating on time, I think including the graduation rate would be relevant, but maybe the teen pregnancy rate or drug use and employment might not be so relevant, or it might be, but it's not obvious. So an explanation would be helpful. Great, thanks. Thanks everyone for your replies. And so as we're thinking through how we're describing the community problem and the data that we're using to document it, I wanted to bring our attention to the idea of the language we use and trying to apply an equity lens. And so full transparency, I'm just recently starting to learn more about how these common terms we use in social services might need an update. And I don't want to present myself as an expert. I absolutely welcome feedback or additional discussion on this topic, but I wanted to share some of what I've been learning with you. I also want to note that this isn't something that your application is scored on. So this isn't something that we're looking to check off. This is simply because we at Serve Washington want to be more mindful of the systems of oppression and how we describe the work that we do. So it's an invitation, it's not a requirement. So a couple of these common terms that I'm learning to look at a little differently. So the term at-risk youth, and we can consider how this term positions some individuals and some communities as centers of risk. But upon deeper examination, we see that the risks emanate more from things like criminalization or disenfranchisement and not on the individuals themselves. And similarly with the term underserved community, this is a phrase that could position charity as a solution. The idea that if we just provide more services, then everything will be fine and the problem will be fixed. But in that, we're ignoring systemic oppression and the achievement gap. What if we considered that there is no achievement gap, that there's a predictable disparity in learning outcomes between well and poorly resourced communities, and calling it an achievement gap could take away attention from the reality of generational wealth and access afforded to some students and not others. Under-resourced, I'd say, is pretty similar to underserved community. And so this link at the bottom of the slide is an article that one of our staff members here at Serve Washington shared with the team that I thought was really helpful. So in that article, it says, we're not suggesting that we use exclusively positive language, which can have similar issues too, but maybe a way to avoid this problem of having the struggles of individual people or places represent something inherent and immutable is instead to explicitly point out the systems at work, past and present, that cause them. So if we're talking about a problem, we can use language that reflects the systematic disparities and community-wide problems, that in fact they have systemic causes, that harm has been done, and that these are not self-caused problems, and we can explicitly describe those systems whenever possible. So it might take a little longer to describe rather than having this like 1 or 2 word phrase that we're using, but it can be more clear and more accurate. So along those lines, there is a equity language guide from the Governor's Interagency Council on Health Disparities. The link is also at the bottom of the slide. The whole document is much longer than this. I just pulled this this sort of table to note different terms and language. They called the language on the right ideal language, but I would say it's better language. The language we use changes constantly, and some of this might already be outdated. And there are a lot of nuances too with this language. So for example, people with disabilities, generally people first language is preferred as it avoids defining a person in terms of their disability, but sometimes advocates or groups prefer identity first language. So checking that out, asking people about their preferences can be a good idea. So that's just another resource about language. And just to be clear, like I'm bringing this up in relation to the theory of change in general, and thinking about how we're describing the problem that we're addressing in our community, but also specifically answering this question, that last question at the bottom about cause. So I think this comes up a lot when we're describing the community problem that we want to address. So another bit from that equity language guide that talks about why language matters. This is an invitation to be explicit in your narrative about why, about the cause of your problem. The problem, not your problem, but the problem that your program is addressing. Why does it exist in the first place? So they note that state data have consistently pointed to differences in access and outcomes experienced by people of color. Examples include gaps in kindergarten readiness, disproportionality in the criminal justice system, and so on. And when documenting these inequities, agencies have historically used language that explicitly states or implies that race or ethnicity is a risk factor. And the council's guidance, and I would say our guidance, is instead to be explicit about racism and other forms of oppression as the underlying causes for the inequities that exist and show up in government data. So such inequities may be due to overt interpersonal racism or institutional racism, which this document explains a little bit more about the differences between those. And they can result in policies or processes having disparate adverse impacts on people of color. So when sharing information on outcomes by race or ethnicity, try to include context about the underlying reasons, including lack of opportunity or policies that have had a disparate impact on various groups of people. But also kind of back to what we talked about earlier with the data dump, don't include the information on these topics on like race or ethnicity if it's not relevant to your program. We don't want it to become a data dump. So just if you're talking about disparities, if that's part of what your program is there to address, then I would say I would encourage you to specifically call out those root causes of the inequities. Okay, so for this section, just a quick recap. So we're going to use local, reputable, relevant statistics, not doing a data dump. And I invite you to consider an equity lens when describing the community problem need. And I want to commend many of you who have already been doing this, and we at Serve Washington have a lot to learn, and we are catching up. Okay. Any questions, comments, or other resources that anyone has?
This is Robert with Washington Service Corps. I have a question.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of the equity lens, you know, much of what I'm seeing with the CNCS guidance or instructional guidance, they've eliminated the term, like for example, under economic opportunity, the term economically disadvantaged. And that was something in the past, and most of the guidance or the instructions say number of individuals served without including that additional term
Uh-huh.
of economically disadvantaged. If we use an equity lens term, will we be asked to serve only those populations defined through the equity lens? And is that something that we need to address, for example, in the economic opportunity area around economically disadvantaged individuals?
Hmm.
Are you following me?
That's somewhat, but it's hard like without a specific example in front of me to like answer with the like clarity or specificity that I would like to.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of it, the number of individuals served at like in an out at risk or in an output. If we define those
Mhm.
as at-risk youth or opportunity youth or achievement gap youth, will we be
Mhm.
forced to only include individuals that meet that definition?
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, like we're not requiring you to change your language, or, I mean, however, whoever your population is that you say that you're serving, and however you define that, it is up to you to define like what counts. And so I don't think on our end anything is changing as far as how we're going to be reviewing or approving performance measures. If there's like some language that you're interested in tweaking but aren't sure how, we can work through that and talk through what might make sense. I'm not
Lou,
sure if that is that
Lou, can
Robin.
I take a shot at that too?
Yeah.
I think it's important to realize that at least how I'm hearing you speak, Lou, is really in regards to the narrative and how you choose to use your language to clearly state what the grant review committee is going to look at the Serve Washington level, which is very different than the definitions and expectations of CNCS when it comes to like something like a performance measure module or an evaluation. We are unfortunately restricted to some federal definitions and to the instructions at the federal level for a performance measure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't choose different language in your narrative section. And so while we will have to follow the federal guidelines for very specific things regarding measures and definitions and collection of data, and they may not be in the same place we are regarding what we feel is a progression on how we talk about these things, I would encourage you to use this information that Lou is presenting more in the general written narrative sections. Is that fair, Lou?
Yes. Yeah. Is that helpful, Robin?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions or comments or other resources that you found helpful?
Lou, while people are thinking of that, I will just let people know if you don't have your chat box open, I was able to copy and paste those links if you need them now, and we will be posting all of the PowerPoint recordings and an accessible PDF that will have these links on your subgrantee resource page next week.
Awesome. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. I will carry on. Okay, so now we can talk a little about finding evidence. So from the application instructions, the two main tasks are summarizing study designs and key findings of any outcome or impact report that's submitted with your application, and describing any other evidence that supports your program, including past performance measure data and or other research studies that inform your program design. So as we're talking about that, what you include kind of depends on the evidence tier that you believe you qualify for. And these evidence tiers have, they change and evolve just a little every few years. So currently these are the evidence tiers, starting with no evidence, then preliminary evidence, preliminary, moderate, and then strong. And so that first item where you summarize the study design and key findings, you only need to do this if you believe you qualify for preliminary, moderate, or strong. Everyone will do number 2, but only those who are looking to qualify for preliminary, moderate, or strong evidence and are submitting additional like research reports or evaluation reports. Those programs are also going to summarize the study design and key findings. And so for those of you who are, keep in mind that to qualify for consideration, the intervention evaluated in those submitted reports has to really, really closely match the intervention that your program is proposing. So that's the characteristics of the beneficiary population, the population delivering the intervention, the dosage, including the frequency, intensity, duration. Everything is very much the same. So essentially, it needs to be usually an evaluation of your program or of like a national model that your program is a part of. So essentially, your program. Occasionally, there are replication programs that have a different name but are very much designed to replicate another program. So I don't think the odds are very good that you'll be able to search and find another program out there that just looks exactly like yours, that has stronger moderate evidence that you can then use to support your program. I think the odds of that are slim to none. So this is pretty much just for those programs who have their own evaluation report of their own program, or that are replicating very closely another one. Okay. So as an example of, so you just saw the level of detail, right, that's expected in that section if you are including a submitted report. So if you look at this example about the intervention is after school, small group tutoring, structured physical activities, field trips that are 3 to 4 hours each day throughout the school year. And so if in the theory of change, this was the evidence that was provided supporting that intervention, what do you think about that evidence? So the statement that they included says there's growing evidence that quality out-of-school opportunities matter, that they complement environments created by schools and families and provide important activities that deter failure and promote success, and that they matter in ways that are observable and measurable. So does this evidence, in your opinion, provide directly relevant performance measurement, evaluation, or research results? Does it appear to be high quality and collected using rigorous methodology? Right, someone replied, that's the narrative, not evidence. Right, so this would be a description of the evidence in the narrative, but they're not really being very specific, are they? It's pretty broad. There aren't too many details. So I would say the evidence is weak. We aren't really sure where these statements are coming from. They make sense and they sound reasonable, but we don't know how this was determined. There's no reference, there's no study described, there's no population or specific intervention that was mentioned. So I would say it's pretty weak. Okay. So the next section, which everyone will include, so even those of you who are qualifying for the preliminary, moderate, or strong tiers, we definitely encourage you to include data on your performance measures, especially if you have positive outcomes over time. So some of you, you all work really hard to track these performance measures, and some of you have been doing this for many, many years. And so I say show that off. This is a great section to include all of the great outcomes that you've been seeing your program accomplish over the years. And here you will also describe any evaluations of your program's intervention or outcomes, and you will also describe how your program is evidence informed. So programs in this category use the best available knowledge, research, and evaluation to guide program design and implementation. But maybe you don't have scientific research or rigorous evaluations of your specific intervention, like we described earlier, but that's totally okay. This is where maybe you've incorporated research from other evidence-based programs into your program design, even if it's not as exact. So there are a couple of sources, just sort of my go-to sources that I would suggest. And I'm going to try to like toggle out of here and pull up evidence exchange. I'm curious, how many of you, if you could in the chat or even aloud, are familiar with the evidence exchange or have used it, have searched on it? And this is CNCS's evidence exchange. So specifically, this is a repository for a lot of AmeriCorps program evaluations. So you can search even like by CNCS focus area. It's really specific to AmeriCorps, and it's growing all the time. Let's see, I'll just kind of search through and just give you all an idea. It seems a bit outdated. I see the comment. Yeah. You know what I did hear recently from someone at CNCS, the Office of Research, was that sometimes during their grant review, they don't necessarily have a mechanism when they're getting in all of these new reports from programs during, like, when programs are recompeting, they don't have a mechanism to like automatically put those report, like check and see if the report is up on the exchange and then upload it. So if you ever notice like, oh, why isn't my report there? Or I know this, other similar program in another state did this cool thing because I'm connected with them and their report isn't there. You can totally let us know or let CNCS know, and we can like prompt them to like make sure that they are doing a better job of updating it, because that has come to our attention before. Yeah, so right now there's only 6 reports posted. The first one that comes up is one of our programs. Shout out to Conservation Corps. You are on there. So yeah, again, like if you're ever like looking for information on the exchange, not finding what you're looking for, need some troubleshooting, reach out to me. This is something we can talk through together. I'll also mention, while I have it pulled up, that Google Scholar is another pretty cool search function. And of course, it's going to have a whole lot more than just AmeriCorps type evaluations. There's all kinds of research there. So you can, I don't know, does anyone have something specific you want me to search for right now? Any ideas?
Hey Lou, this is Petra from the service board.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's terrible. How about research on family engagement impacting school student engagement? Does that make sense? Like impacting graduation rates, let's say.
Impact on student engagement. That and I also like how you can specify how recent you want it to be. So maybe you decide your cutoff is 6 years. You only want to show research that's been done in the last 6 years. You can choose that. So here are some things that come up. So maybe
I can't read it from my end.
Okay.
It's kind of jarbled, I think.
Okay.
But it looks like things did come up.
Cool. Yeah, things did come up. And these are all like, because it's Google Scholar and not google.com, it weeding out things like Wikipedia articles or news articles and things, or like people's personal blogs and stuff like that. So it's just
Right, like we could bet that these would be like valid to our conversation.
Right.
In a grant planning setting. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so those, I really like, those are sort of my two go-to search resources. If you know of others, I think there are other like education clearinghouses that have other cool like research and program evaluation specific to education. You know, those exist out there and probably for other focus areas. But if you feel free to share with your peers if you know of other cool places to find evidence, I would be happy to showcase those as well. All right. So any questions or comments? We are pretty much wrapping up a little early, but we will have a break before our second part.
Lou, while people are thinking of questions, could you maybe go over how you would cite this? I know every funder requires something different. Can you talk about the fact that we don't cite on a bibliography page and we cite in the narrative?
Right. Yes. We don't have a specific way that we expect you to cite, but basically, if you share the source and definitely share the year. A title or author could also be helpful, but basically we're just looking for, you know, say you were on Google Scholar and there was a journal article, you could reference like the, you know, from the Journal of education 2016, and maybe name the title of the article. And if there was ever any question about it, be prepared to back it up. If there was ever anything that we weren't sure about, but I've not seen that happen. I think generally we take your word for it, that this is something that you did indeed find and see. So just a basic, like, where you found the information and the year. That's generally what we're looking for. Would you agree, Robin?
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't have like a hard and fast rule.
No, that was a perfect answer. And unfortunately for us, hyperlinks, our grant review committee is not allowed to access hyperlinks, but we do take your word. And as Lou said, that was a great answer. We have another question that came in. If you have an opinion, Lou, how important is country of origin when reviewing research? For example, research that is based in the UK versus the USA.
Yeah. I generally would say it's pretty important. That's a good question. Because there's, there are so many variables. I guess it would depend specifically on the topic. But in general, I think there's just so many differences culturally, just with our systems, with how things function. I guess it would really depend, because I know there are other things that, humans are really similar across cultures and populations and time and place. But I would personally be wary of something from another, like the UK. I'm thinking of, in the education or health field. But again, like if you're searching and that's the most similar thing that you can find, the most up to date, the most something that seems the most relevant. There's maybe it's a topic that there's just not a lot of research at all out there, then by all means use it for sure. But if you could find something similar that was from the US, then I would say like keep searching and try to find that. But if it really doesn't exist, then use what you've got. All right. Anyone else?
I'm not seeing anything else in the chat.
All right. Okay, so coming up, we have the performance measures simplified. I see we are at 10:30. Hopefully most people are back. Sorry, I think I'm not muted now. So in the chat, just, as another like little activity as we get started. Okay, I see someone already replied. Your favorite thing about summer? Long sunsets is one thing. I love those too. So feel free to share your favorite thing and keep getting to know each other, even though we aren't in person. Lake swimming, baseball, heat and sunshine, yes. All the things. Sunny days in the backyard, looking at flowers. I personally love summertime. Drive-in movie theaters. Wow, I haven't been to one in a really long time. Hiking, supporting local farm stands. Gardening, visiting family, more swimming. Yes. And I've learned that lake swimming in particular seems to be my preference as well, because the rivers here seem particularly chilly. So lakes are generally a little warmer. Raspberries in the front yard. That sounds amazing. I need to plant some raspberries. That is on my list. Oregon Beach, 5 a.m. walks in the daylight. I'm not sure that I would enjoy that, but it sounds really nice. It could be nice. 5 a.m. That's so early. All right, great. It looks like we have most people back. So let's go ahead and get started. It's a little after 10:30. So this session, we're going to talk about performance measures. And we're going to keep it pretty simple. So first some of you may have seen this template before. I wonder how well you can see it, because it sounded like when I pulled up the other web page with kind of smaller text, that was hard to see. So maybe you won't be able to see this so well, but this is a performance measure template, and it is going to be shared along with the other resources for this presentation. So you'll be able to have this and look at it in more detail. But I think it's also something that's been shared out around grant competition time. So this is just a handy little template that kind of summarizes all of the various components of that go into the performance measurement module. And so as you'll see, there's the problem statement, which is, we're suggesting keeping that brief, and then the described intervention, which is where you describe the design, dosage, all of that of your intervention, and then the output and outcomes. Generally, like, we don't really see, or at least I haven't been seeing any issues with targets or like that unit of measurement. That's not something that seems to be something most of you have gotten, and there's not really a whole lot there, but this presentation will cover some of the other parts where we have some common pitfalls, I'll call them. So yeah, that first one, we often see really long problem statements, and that's not necessary, especially in this section. So you don't need to be copying and pasting from your theory of change narrative in your grant application. You don't need to be copying and pasting like that whole big paragraph or two about the problem or need. Instead, you really can be as concise and precise as the problem or need that you're describing in your logic model. So in that very first column of your logic model, we ask for the problem that you're addressing, and usually you all have been really good about having it really pretty short there. So just 1 or 2 sentences, that's all that's needed. And I've got an example on this page. So you can see straight off, just by a glance, which problem statement more closely follows those instructions for the performance measures that I just shared about keeping it brief. So that example number 2, it's just 2 short sentences that really sum up what the problem is. And so that's really all we're looking for there. It's much easier for our reviewers to review it, and all of this other detail, like, here they're citing the neighborhood and community report, OSPI, and like all of that detail, that's great for the narrative in the like theory of change problem needs statement section. That's not the level of detail that you need to include in the performance measurement module. And so common pitfall number 2, that described intervention, a lot of times the dosage isn't clear. So in that section, we're looking for the intervention, which is like who's doing what with whom, or in the case of environmental programs, who's doing what with what, or where. So that should be really clear, and your intervention's dosage. And so the dosage includes those 3 components of frequency, intensity, and duration. In that described intervention heading, we want to see how often or how long over what span of time is your intervention occurring. Common pitfall number 3. So in the instrument section, so there's an output instrument and the outcome instrument section. And so sometimes these can get really long, and there are certain details that do need to be included, but the right kind of details, right? So we want you to include what's being counted. So for example, participants who attend a session, and then what tool specifically is being used to track that. So an example could be, it's a sign-in sheet that members are collecting and then transferring into Excel. That would be an example. Common pitfall number 4. We often see outcome instruments, the outcome instrument specifically. So I know we were just talking about the output and outcome instruments, but more specifically, the outcome instrument should also include these items. So specify who is counted. So for example, maybe only those who complete the full dosage. Sometimes it's really not clear who's being counted in the outcome. And then we also want to see an explanation of the change required between pre and post in order for a person to be counted. So not only do they have to receive whatever the dosage may be, but what sort of change do you expect? So often, there are some exceptions, but most often the case is that you're administering some sort of pre-assessment or survey or observation, and then at the end, after the program has delivered the intervention, you're checking to see and collect data on the post-assessment. And so sometimes we don't always see, though, in here, what has to change. How much of a difference are you looking for someone to be counted as having met this outcome? So make sure that you include that. And then also, we're looking to see too, why is this change significant or meaningful? So if someone improved by X amount, how do we know that that means anything? And sometimes this is maybe where evidence is coming in. Maybe this is based on research or program evaluation that shows that we know if X amount of improvement has been shown, then it really makes a difference. I think I've got more clear example on the next slide. So let's just look at this. So for example, you could say participants who have completed at least 4 30-minute sessions are expected to demonstrate an increase in knowledge by scoring at least 20% higher on the 15-item nutrition assessment on the post-test compared to the pre-test. Because a 20% increase demonstrates that the knowledge gain is likely due to the effects of the program instruction and not just sheer chance. So that's something that we're looking for in the outcome instrument. All right. That's actually all I have, which is super short and sweet. So we covered keeping the problem statement really brief, clearly describing the intervention, including the dosage in that described intervention section. And we talked about the types of details to include for the output and outcome instruments. So does anybody have any questions about any of that? Anything that was not clear? Or thoughts, input?
Lou, I just want to apologize for the greatness. I think what I am learning is that when we have videos and we have to set the platform to show the video and audio, it's creating some graininess. And so we will work on that and try to toggle between that in the future. But that you showed at the beginning will be posted. And it's just something that you can brainstorm before you get into the eGrants module. It's a nice place to be able to write all of those things down in a very simplified form that Lou's talking about.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
We do have a question. If we need to make any changes based on what you just shared, when do you want us to do this?
That is a great question. I would say usually whenever you recompete, so every 3 years, that's when we make changes to performance measures. But if you're concerned that whatever you have written just like isn't even accurate, and it's not just like you're clarifying something just to make it more straightforward or simplified, but it's just like the information isn't accurate, then definitely reach out to your program officer and we could discuss like if it makes sense to change. But generally, the type of things that I just went over, those are things that we can wait until you are recompeting, and that's when we make those sort of changes to performance measures. Yeah, anything else? Sorry, what was that, Robin?
I'm not seeing any of the questions.
Okay.
I have a quick question. This is Kendra from Servois.
Yeah.
No, from Washington Service Corps. You're at Servois. I do that all the time. So just wondering about, so in PMs, because of course we're in grant writing season right now, and we're talking a lot about, strategically, we're thinking about a shift down to a less is more kind of perspective, because our history with our grants and everything is, and we ran on this with the Reading Corps as well. So what would your recommendation be for moving forward? Because I see that you're kind of simplifying with all of the need and everything. What would your recommendation be for to kind of keep PMs to a manageable or limited scope, or include all the PMs and have them all in the grant? What's your recommendation to that? I don't know if I'm saying that eloquently. Is there a recommendation for how many PMs per focus area a grant should have?
Okay. I mean, I would say in general, CNCS is really only looking for, even if you have multiple